This is the story of one of the many most iconic, remembered, and ever-changing Greek myths, Medusa. Usually depicted as a winged female creature having a head of hair consisting of snakes, but sometimes represented as very beautiful. Earlier Greek writers and artists portray her as just a monster born into a large family of monsters. However, late classical poets depict her as once being a beautiful woman who was transformed into a monster. For the sake of this video, let's forget everything we think we know about Medusa. Let's say Medusa was not a woman transformed into a Gorgon, not to begin with. The Gorgon has appeared all through Greek mythology, as far back as 6000 BC. This shows how their appearance and meaning has gone through many changes. The first mention comes from the Furies, 3 ugly, winged women with snakes around their body and hair, who were in charge of punishing men for horrible crimes. They were not considered to be Gorgon, but they had a very similar appearance, and there were 3 of them, just like Medusa and her sisters. The first appearance of the Gorgon was called the Elder Gorgon, Medusa's father. Others thought that the first Gorgon was something called Gorgo, daughter of Helios. Early depictions of Gorgons aren't pretty women with snake hair. They had beards, tusks, and curly hair, which may have looked like snakes. Gorgo was eventually killed by Zeus during the Titanomachy. During this time it seemed Gorgons had no purpose, and there was no mention of Medusa. The bearded, tusked women continued to appear throughout history until they were considered protectors of oracles. Their appearance started to change now, having scales for skin, sharp claws, and hair that sometimes had snakes in it. In the 8th century BC, we start to hear about the Gorgons with Homer's Iliad. He refers to a shield called the Aegeus that was encrusted with the head of a Gorgon. Before the Iliad, all that was known about Gorgons came from pottery and sculptures. After the Iliad, the Gorgons began to develop more of a storyline. Homer mentions the Gorgon again in the Odyssey, depicting it as a singular, frightening monster. 7th century BC is when the story becomes more recognizable to some. Medusa was one of the 3 daughters of 2 primordial sea gods, the father, Phorcys, who had a fishtail, crab-like arms, and red spiky skin, and the mother, Ceto. This was the first time the sisters were given names, Stheno the Mighty, Euryale of the Wide Sea, and Medusa the Queen. Along with the 3 Gorgon sisters, the 2 sea gods' offspring also included Echidna, the mother of all monsters, the Grey Witches, who were 3 sisters known for sharing one eye, and Ladon, a dragon that guarded golden apples. Of the 3 Gorgon sisters, Medusa is the only one depicted as being mortal, but it is unclear whether it was because of looks or if she was actually capable of aging. At this time, it was shown that all 3 sisters had monstrous form. Several hundred years after Homer and Hesiod, in 490 BC, the poet Pindarus wrote about Medusa being fair-cheeked. She began to be seen as beautiful. Around this time, Medusa and her sisters were described as being able to turn anything into stone with their venomous snake hair. The most dramatized version of Medusa's story involves Athena and Poseidon. Ovid published his Metamorphosis in the 8th century AD that included Medusa. He was the first to describe her as completely human. Let's take a look. From the Roman poet Ovid, the story goes that many men were mesmerized by Medusa's beauty and sought after her. But out of respect for Athena, she remained pure, as she would become the priestess of Athena's temple. Thousands visited Athena's temple, most only to get a glance at Medusa's beauty, some saying her beauty rivaled even that of Athena's. Athena, obviously, knowing this, became jealous and resentful. One day, as Medusa was walking, she caught Poseidon, the sea god's, attention, who immediately became consumed by her beauty, and also because she was serving Athena, who was his rival at the time. She rejected many of his advances and approaches over and over again. He grew tired of waiting and being denied, so he took her by force to take advantage of her beauty as well as a chance to upset Athena. She sought protection in Athena's temple, but unfortunately Poseidon had his way with her. Shortly afterward, Athena appeared in an outrage, mad her temple was defiled, and mad at Poseidon. The only thing she could think of to do was punish Medusa with no sympathy, cursing her and turning her hair into snakes, giving her a gaze that would turn anyone who looked at her into stone, making her as undesirable as possible. Further, she was sent into exile. In another version, instead of Athena instantly appearing, Medusa reaches out to her, devastated, asking for help, though the outcome is the same. In yet another version, her sisters are also transformed for defending Medusa. They are also disfigured and sent back to their home island Sarpedon, becoming vicious monsters that kill any man that sets foot there. After her unjust transformation, it's been said that she had trouble with her new identity, but came around to embrace it and take her vengeance on men, the only way to get even with Poseidon. She is not allowed to leave her island. When people found out about Medusa, many men came to her, as hunters now instead of suitors, looking to take her head for their own advantage. Over time, she became more vicious and vengeful, turning them all to stone. All except one, Perseus, son of Zeus, who was sent on a quest to retrieve her head. He was successful mostly due to help from the gods: Hades' invisible helmet, winged sandals from Hermes to match her speed, a shield from Athena that he could use as a mirror to avoid her direct gaze, and a sword from Hephaestus able to cut off her head. Medusa was pregnant at this time, but unable to give birth as cursed by Athena. However, after Perseus beheaded Medusa, from her blood sprung the offspring of Poseidon, Pegasus, a white horse with wings. In movies such as Clash of the Titans, which follows the story of Perseus, scorpions sprung from her blood instead. In other stories, Perseus was successful since Medusa was the only mortal Gorgon and was able to be killed. And not only Pegasus rose from her blood, but the golden giant Chrysaor as well. What's more, as Perseus traveled, the drops of blood began to fall over places like Libya, which sprouted into a venomous viper. It is said that is why Libya is full of vipers to this day. It's also said that the blood is the reason the corals of the Red Sea were formed. Authors claim that the corals were created when the drops of blood spilled onto seaweed. Perseus used Medusa's head for aid in many adventures, and was used for good and protection, like defeating the Titan Atlas, the sea monster Cetus, and saving Perseus's mother. It's been said that Medusa's head was later given to Athena, who placed it on her shield as the ultimate symbol of protection and power. Or it was buried by Perseus in the marketplace of Argos. It can be seen that Medusa has more influence in her death, giving Perseus protection and the power to do good, and giving the world contributions with her story. The debacle between Poseidon and Medusa is only seen in Ovid's story, who had a thing for painting gods in a negative light when given the chance. In the Greeks' adaptation of the story, Athena transforms Medusa into a Gorgon as a way of protecting her, so no man could ever harm her again. There are still stories from Greek sources where Athena did punish Medusa. In one, Medusa compares her beauty to the gods, and she was transformed to teach her a lesson. In another, Medusa slept with Poseidon in Athena's temple by choice and was punished. Ovid's story of Medusa has blown up over time and has become part of the Me Too movement. After a lot of sexual assault stories became prominent in the media, the feminist movement used Medusa as a symbol, as people resonated with being sexually assaulted and blamed. I do like this idea and support Medusa as being a symbol people can stand with. However, this is only Ovid's version of the story, and if you take that as being the only version, I feel like you miss out on a lot. In his version, she is a victim. In others, she and the Gorgon have symbolized much more throughout history. Gorgon-born Medusa was a symbol of protection, having her face on amulets known as the Gorgonian, keeping away evil spirits for those who wore it as a pendant. Zeus and Athena were both known to wear one as well. Her face was even painted on the front of women's shelters to let them know it was a safe space. This myth is remembered in many ways today. In the 20th century, feminists reassessed Medusa's appearances in literature and in modern culture, along with the Me Too movement. She is also used as a logo by fashion company Versace. She even appears in music lyrics and albums, such as Annie Lennox's Medusa or UB40's Madame Medusa. In television and movies, she appears in quite a few. Medusa, played by Jemima Rupa, appears in the BBC One series Atlantis before she became a Gorgon. She also appears in the 1964 horror film The Gorgon, the 1981 Clash of Titans, as well as the 2010 Clash of Titans. Look familiar? Uma Thurman plays Medusa in Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. From my personal knowledge, you can find Medusa in many video games. For instance, in League of Legends, the champion Cassiopeia. Her abilities poison her targets, and her ultimate stuns them, turning them to stone if they are facing her, and slowing them if their backs are turned. You can find her again in Dota 2, Defense Against the Ancients, as Medusa. She carries a bow and arrow, like in both Clash of the Titan movies, and her ultimate ability in this game also turns the enemies to stone. She is also seen in games like D&D, Smite, God of War, Final Fantasy, Titan Quest, Castlevania, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where she is implied to be a human that has transformed by the effects of the Apple of Eden, and so much more. There are many different sides to Medusa: victim, monster, villain, protector, mother, and hope. She is interpreted in many different ways, maybe one of the most misunderstood characters in Greek mythology, because no stories are wrong. Which do you prefer? Which story can you take away the most from?